Is this my gift from Alan and James?
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, James. Thanks, Crispy.
So you've seen this?
I have not yet. I'm waiting for you're the last person to see it, other than me. So after you see it, then I'm gonna see it.
This is the class that started it all for me.
Same. Well, of course, kind of.
People are gonna like this card.
You think so? Really? Oh, I'm excited to see it now. Now that I can just tell you like it.
What's up, guys? My name's Josh, and welcome back to FAB 201. This is episode number 3. If you haven't watched this series before, go watch episode 1 and 2. Things will make a lot more sense, and then come back here and watch episode 3. This episode is all about macro and strategy. Last week we talked about tactics and the micro part of the game. So we looked at one particular turn. We zoomed in and focused on all the decisions on defense and offense. We went through a step-by-step process on how to defend and attack properly. Today we're going to zoom out and we're going to look at the game as a whole. We're going to look at the strategy of the game. We're going to look at the overarching picture of the game. What, from the very, very beginning, once you flip your heroes, all the way to the final attack. So what are we going to be using for this game? Or what are we going to be using for this week? Well, we're going to use a game that I played recently in the FAB Competitive League. It is a Raiden Bolton versus a Boost Dash Classic Constructed game. Both heroes operate as quite aggressive decks, but they are both mid-range decks that like to set up 5-card hands. So I believe that this is one of the best examples of talking about strategy in general and the progression of strategy. Just as a little sneak peek, next week we're going to be talking about using math for a competitive advantage. I know not everybody likes math, but in TCGs and in FAB, math can go a long way to helping you make better decisions in deck building and in the game as well. So we're going to be going over practical situations next week. But that's next week. So let's get to today's topic. So strategy begins at sideboarding. Once you flip your heroes, the very first thing that you need to do is sideboard. So when you're sideboarding, that is actually when you first need to construct your strategy. You need to construct how your deck intends to win. Now, some decks, this is a little bit more straightforward. Some decks is a little bit more complicated. A good example of this is Prism. Prism can operate as a Aura deck or as a Herald aggro deck at the moment. If the Prism sees that they're playing against a Bravo, they're more likely to side into an Aura package. If the Prism player is playing against a Ketsu, who is a hero that does not have a lot of 6 blocks, except for Command and Conquer, the Prism player is much more likely to side into a Herald aggro plan. Okay? So at the sideboarding stage, you need to already have a general idea about what you're going to be doing in the matchup. That means generally, are you going to be on offense? Are you going to be on defense? Is there any key cards that you need to set up, such as a time snap potion against Prism, or a defense reaction, a heavy defense reaction against Bravo? Okay. Next, once you get into the game, you need to look at how your strategy will evolve in the game. Now, it's really important to understand that your strategy, which dictates your tactics, can change in the middle of the game. Two examples here that I wrote down is that if key cards or equipment is used, then that will adjust your strategy. A good example of this is the Bloodsheath Skeleton being used with Viscerai. Once Viscerai uses that, his threat density in many ways goes down. Or if, which we're going to look into in this game, boost dash once they've used their high octane or Achilles accelerator, their game plan is going to become more defensive. All right. Your strategy can also change mid-game if you get caught off guard. Let's say you presume that your opponent is going to be playing Ice Lexi, and they throw you a curveball and they play Lightning Lexi. Then you need to be a little bit more cognizant of the on-hit effects, making sure they don't get value from things like Electrify, Shock Strikers, or using things like Lightning Press, right? Another example of that would be, let's say Bravo is being, you sideboarded against Bravo. You really thought it was going to be more of a control style Bravo, but this Bravo is just playing Thump, it's playing Pummel, very, very aggressive style. Then you need to change your plan. You need to adjust your strategy. All right? So today we're going to look at a game between Boltyn and Dash. So let's talk more in depth about those two heroes. All right? So Boltyn can be played currently in 3 different ways. You can play with the Centauri Sabers and go for the Lumina combo, hitting 6 or 8 times and trying to essentially OTK, finish the game off with a large soul and a Beacon of Victory. The other style is a Raiden style. This deck utilizes 9 Take Flights and Tunic and tries to play with via the Vanguard, Take Flight, and use things like Beacon of Victory and Lumina Ascension as really their power cards. There exists a deck in the middle, a Switch style. Not really a huge fan of that style, but it does exist. It's a deck that can go either way. However, I think personally it does neither strategy particularly well. So if I was giving advice to aspiring Boltyn players, I'd say pick one and stick with it. All right. On the other side of the matchup, we have Dash. Dash can be played as a boost deck using things like 0 to 60, Throttle, and getting value out of the Tekla Foundry Heart and finishing the turn with some pistol shots. Can also be played as a control deck with lots of defense reactions, even bringing in things like Unmovable. And in this case, they're going to be trying to set up multiple induction chambers and multiple plasma purifiers and block pitch blues, load, and fire, and just wear the opponent down. And there exists a more mid-range style where you play boost until you miss your boost, and then you use your accelerators to keep going. And then once you've run out of your accelerators and maybe you've run out of high octanes or you've run out of your threatening cards, then you go back to the pistol strategy to finish the game off. All right. So those are the 3 strategies that they both have. And so in sideboarding, I am playing Raiden. So I already know that I'm going to focus a little bit heavier on setting up big turns. And my opponent as Dash doesn't really know which style I'm going to play. So I anticipate that they're likely to play a little bit more towards the aggressive side, since if you're playing control against Saber Boltyn, you're just going to lose because you put no pressure on them. And yeah, that's not really where you want to be as Dash. All right. So in terms of strategy, when we get into the game, I want you guys to keep an eye out for these few cards that I've written down here. So for Boltyn, Via the Vanguard and Beacon of Victory are very important because Via the Vanguard with Tunic allows for 20, 25 damage turns, and Beacon of Victory allows you to push over the defense, generally to enable an on-hit effect, tutor a card, generally Lumina Ascension or maybe a Valiant Thrust. And these cards come in, by their nature, they're only 3 ofs. So it's pretty easy to track these key cards, right? On the dashes side, we have High Octane. This enables very nutty turns because they give you extra action points. Allows you to play things like Tome of Fendel, and if you boost multiple times and you actually have enough energy, you can shoot your pistol 5, 6, 7 times at the end of the chain. All right. Achilles Accelerator is very important, especially if you're running non-attack actions or non-mechanologist cards such as Command and Conquer, Sink Below, Tome of Fendel in your deck. All right. And speaking of those, Sink Below and Fate Foreseen, these are cards that, as the Bolton player, if I see those cards, then I know that my opponent is more likely to have to use their accelerators and then switch their strategy. All right. So we're going to jump into the game right now. And this game is actually going to be played at 200% speed, so we can kind of zip through it. So we'll be back here in about 20 minutes. All right, guys, let's just jump into the game here. As you can see by the footage, it has been sped up a bit. We're actually watching this game at double speed because this episode is more focused on the macro aspects of the game. Although I will mention specific tactics when they come up if important. So this matchup is Bolton versus Dash, and I won the dice roll, so I opted to go first. That's generally a good idea as Bolton, and doubly so because Dash is one of the few characters that can take resources to the next turn. We could load her induction chamber, pistol, and arsenal, and that would be an excellent turn. So this game is going to be broken up into several phases. The first phase, I guess you could call it the pre-tunic phase, will be basically the turns before I have a charged tunic, before I have a valuable card in arsenal, and it is the setup turn. It's where you will generally be blocking with 2 cards and trying to come back with 2 cards, charging your soul. So in terms of the Dash player, the Dash player has opted for a more boost-focused strategy. However, he still does have several items, and we will see them later in the game as the game progresses. So the first thing I need to do here is kind of figure out what my opponent is doing. So that's kind of why what the first few turns are basically for, is figuring out what plan is my opponent on. And because Dash can be played in several different ways, and feeling out your opponent in the first couple turns is quite important as a mid-range deck. All right, so it's turn 3 right now, and I've already gotten 3 cards into the soul. Or it's actually turn 2. This is actually pretty good in terms of soul generation here. So seeing the red throttle here basically tells me that my opponent is on a more aggressive boost strategy, and so I will need to adapt a little bit to that. So my opponent pops Heart here, flips 2 cards, and gets 2 energy here, and sends in another red throttle. However, he misses his boost, and this is where my opponent has a little bit of a think, deciding whether or not to use the accelerators. And for him, his state of the game can be broken down into 2 phases. When he has the accelerators, he can play more aggressively, and when he does not have his accelerators, it becomes way more risky to hold a 5-card hand as Dash, and it basically means he has to decide whether he's using the accelerators to keep tempo, or to enable a big 5-card hand. And we'll see him decide that shortly. So now my Tunic has been charged up. I have a nice hand here that attacks very well. Illumina Ascension as well in Arsenal that can be played in combination with these guaranteed go-agains. So I'm very likely not to block here, or minimal block here, because this hand plays quite well. Take Flight with the Tunic is one of the best plays that you can do. So here my opponent actually boosts and misses his boost, so he uses his accelerator to get his action point back and plays his third red throttle here. So actually the game has already moved into another phase here, and it's only turn 3. So right now, without the boots, and seeing that my opponent runs Tome of Fendel and Sink Below, it makes it much more likely that he's going to play a more defensive style, more item-focused deck. Or strategy, I should say. And yep, so he sets up a Tekla Core here, a very good card for enabling giant turns with high octane or with maximum velocity. So Lumina Ascension after Take Flight coming in here for 2 swings of Raiden, building up quite a large soul. Bolton can always make use of his soul, as long as he still has Celestial Cataclysm and Beacon of Victory. I believe in the next set there'll probably be another way to utilize the soul. So a little bit of life gain here, quite nice. And my opponent has not blocked this whole turn here. And he throws his armor in front of Raiden, and I play out a Bolt of Courage at the end of the combat chain here. And I believe he's going to let it hit, allows me to draw. And I put a Beacon of Victory into my arsenal, and I am anticipating a gigantic turn here from my opponent, considering he has a Tekla Core and he has a bunch of cards. So he leads out with a high octane. That is exactly the type of card that enables big turns. Plays a 0 to 60 boosting. Now this was a little bit of a risk, in that if he missed his boost, he would only have 1 action point here, and then actually it's not that big of a risk, considering that the okay, actually it is a risk because he wanted to play a Tome of Fendel to follow up, and he needed the action point. Okay, so he plays a Tome of Fendel here, draws a bunch of cards, activates Heart. Flipping the whole deck there. Activates Heart, gets a couple more resources, and he has a ton of cards, ton of resources here, and a bunch of action points. He mills over another high octane here, and that is definitely something to be watching out for. So now that my opponent has run out of high octanes, actually, the game moves to another stage. So now he has no Achilles accelerators, no high octanes left. So I know that this is basically his big turn. And then from here on out, he's going to try to put down items and play a value game and chip me out. So I have to anticipate that. And basically, if he's going to play a more defensive style, I need to make sure that I have 5-card hands that can break through his defenses. So here I'm blocking a bit, and in order to have a turn, I've got to keep this Engulfing Light and another card to charge. The Beacon here, I'm thinking about using it for Illumina and swinging twice here, because some of his armor is already kind of beat up. And he has a Tekla Core on the field, so he's quite incentivized to keep his hand. So that means he is less likely to block the Lumina swings. Although he still has a a decent amount of armor, so it's not too hard for him to block with a card and armor, but he can't just throw all of his armor at one of the attacks. So here, it's the end of the high octane combo, throwing a ton of pistol shots at me, pitching a plasma purifier to get an extra damage here, and that plasma purifier is going to come back much later in the game. We will see that again. So I played Engulfing Light, charging a Battlefield Blitz. And so something that's kind of like in between strategy and tactics is I can see that my opponent has a Tekla core on the field. So that means these 2 turns, he is likely to keep his hand. However, he's less likely to keep his hand because he's already used his accelerators. And if he doesn't have a high octane, which I know he doesn't have a high octane, he is taking quite a bit of a risk trying to play out a 5-card hand. So I know that he's a little bit more likely to block here. And we see him throw out a block there. And I believe this is also going to get blocked here. Looks like he was blocked by a Sync Blow. Very clean. But there's still another Radiant Swing coming in. And I believe this is probably going to get blocked as well, if I had to guess. It's been a while since I've watched this game. So yeah, currently I'm losing in terms of life, but I know that my opponent has used several key cards here. I know he's used it's a clean block for 4 there. He's used all his throttles, all his high octanes. His armor's pretty beat up. He does not have a second item in play. Actually, so that is some stuff that's going in our favor. Although this is 7 life deficit here is not great here. And this soul shield is pretty useless here because he is without throttle. He's not going to attack for he's never going to attack for a giant chunk of damage. However, I believe in my current deck list, this is just a Soul Shield is just a necessary evil. I gotta play it to get to 60 cards. And cards that are bad are not that bad because you could always just charge them. It actually doesn't, except for V of the Vanguard, it doesn't matter what you charge. So Soul Shield can just be used as a generic charge card or for 2-pitch in the worst of circumstances. And so I figure out that I can't play my whole hand, so I just block here. And I charge the Soul Shield, and depending on blocks here, I might play the Beacon of Victory. If he blocks with an attack action, I'm heavily incentivized to play the Beacon of Victory, because it's basically, because it ensures the Engulfing Light hits, which is an extra card of the soul. So now we've moved into the phase of the game where our life totals are getting a little bit lower. I still haven't seen a V of the Vanguard, which is a little bit concerning because that is a card that basically demands that you have a 5-card hand. In order to get the maximum value from V of the Vanguard, you ideally want to play it from Arsenal with the Tunic. That is the best possible way to play V of the Vanguard. And since I believe that my opponent is going to go towards a more defensive build, I really need these 5-card hands to punch through damage here. But he has kept his hand, which is I mean, he didn't block the Engulfing Light, which is a medium threat, and this is gonna tell me a lot about what his next turn is his plan for the next turn. If he does not block this Lumina, I will be quite surprised because he has no more high octanes and he has no accelerators. So any boost maximum velocity turn is quite risky, given that he still possibly has a Toma Fendel. He possibly still has a Sync Blow in his deck. Plus, he may be running Fate Foreseen, maybe even an Immovable, but that is a little bit unlikely against Bolton. So he's tanking here for a little bit of time here, and I guess he has a borderline hand. One that attacks decently, but he's probably considering that it is a bit of a risk to go for it. Looks like he opts not to block. And in comes Raiden again here. And if he doesn't block the first one... Okay, he blocks the second one. Okay. Sure. Okay, so I guess he is just going to do some pistol things here and maybe follow up with a boost at the end, depending on... So once you lose the accelerators as dash, that's basically the best play pattern, is to pistol, react, pistol, or depending on how many chambers you have, pistol, react, and then boost. And then even if you missed your boost, you've still gotten in a couple of damage. And you notice how he loaded his pistol and induction chamber before he attacked, which is smart. Here I have a very, very awkward hand here. So I'm basically just going to block out here, set up a plunder run. This was played in week 2 of the FAB competitive league, so this was before the ban announcement. So yeah, I'm gonna set up one of these plunder runs into Arsenal and pass back to him. I know that passing back to an opponent and giving him 5 cards is not the best feeling in the world. However, the spikiness of the dash has been reduced greatly because of the current game state. So I know that it's not the end of the world to just Raiden for 0 Arsenal plunder run pass. So the game is pretty close here. He's leading a little bit on life, and he's attacking into me with a full grip of cards. However, I do have a plunder run in Arsenal, and I have a pretty healthy soul. My armor's still looking good, and I still have my tunic and snapdragons. So this is anybody's game here. However, time is running out for me to find a Via the Vanguard. I've kind of bought time with these Beacon Lumina turns that have allowed me to gain 4 or 5 life over the course of the game. It's allowed me to slow down the game a bit, but I'm still desperately needing a finisher here. So he did his pistol shenanigans into a 0 to 60 here. This hand is pretty good. I'm very likely to keep this hand here, I think. Looking at this, this is gonna drop me down pretty low here, but I know that I could come in with Plunder Run Express Lightning. I have Courageous to make sure it hits, and then I could follow up with Tunic Valiant Thrust into Raiden. So this is a ton of damage here. And my opponent makes a curious decision here. So one of the benefits of a wide attack pattern is that you could kind of identify if your opponent wants to block or not. And it was clear that I did not want to block. And he pitched a Sink Below to play a Tome from Arsenal to gain 2 life. And I pretty strongly believe that's wrong, because having a defense reaction here would actually ensure that the Courageous Steel Hand play would not work. A Beacon, a Victory plan would not work because I don't have enough soul for that. So if I was him, I would have kept the Sink Below, even though that is a little bit inefficient. It's just a premium card when you've attacked 4 or 5 times and your opponent is willing to drop from 16 down to 5. So yeah, my opponent has a pretty tough decision here because he has no more Sink Belows. We haven't seen a Fate Foreseen from him, so I feel pretty confident that he does not have a defense reaction here. He blocks with no attack action here, so it's just for 7. 7 against 7 here. I'm going to give it go again here, and then I'm going to play the Courageous Steel Hand to draw a card here. I think I'm debating here whether to use my Snapdragons or to pull a card from my soul. I decide that it's better just to save the Snapdragons for now. Courageous comes in, 2 damage comes across, and I draw a good Arsenal card, but not a good card for continuing the attack this turn. Here's a little tactic. Generally, you want to put your Raiden attack in the middle of the combat chain, because that gives your opponent less information. I could have went Valiant Thrust into Raiden, but going Raiden into Valiant Thrust hides a bit about what I'm about to do. So right now, this has been a pretty big turn, quite a bit of damage coming across, demanding quite a few blocks. And I have a Via the Vanguard that I drew, but this is not a comfortable position at all, because 5 health means a lot. Like the pistol is about to become lethal very soon. So I have to, and I don't have a charged tunic either. So there's a lot of problems here for me. So looks like I take the first pistol shot, and my opponent is either going to load his pistol induction chamber or he's going to play a boost card here. Looks like he loads and going to play out high speed impact from the arsenal. So this is 4 damage here. So I'm going to have to give him a card or possibly the armor. However, I know that he still has an action point here. So if I block with the armor, and then there's another attack, I'd have to give him a card. So this is a little bit of a precarious position here. Yeah, so I'm just trying to calculate right now, how do I play my Via the Vanguard in the most optimal way here? Because without a charged tunic, I'm going to have to pitch for Via the Vanguard. So that's going to impact the potency of my Via the Vanguard. So a zipper hit here coming in for 3. I believe I just give him the armor here, because the pistol shot will take me down to 1 here. And then I can keep 3 cards plus a V. That might be enough here to get me back into the game, or to at least force a 4-card block, and then I might be able to get in there with a Courageous Steel Hand, or maybe just catching him with a hand with 2 cards that don't block. So quite a bit of debate here on what to do, whether to give him a card and play for the longer game, maybe try to get my tunic charged, or throw my armor here, take the pistol shot, go down to 1. And I believe that I decide to go for it here. Because I know that the longer the game drags out, if my opponent can keep a single blue, that's already going to present 2 sources of 2 damage. And that is will demand 2 cards, and then eventually he'll just get the tempo back. If I throw my armor in front of it, he comes in with the pistol, I drop down to 1, and at 1 life, I play my very first Via the Vanguard of the game. And I keep the Courageous Steel Hand, hoping that he does not block this. hoping I could get a cheeky victory here. However, I believe he will block this, and if he blocks this and blocks Raiden, I can probably take him down to maybe 2 or 3, depending on what he blocks with. So right now, I'm just thinking about my outs here. I'm thinking about how can I possibly win this game. So this Courageous Steel hand looks like he's going to take 1 damage here from that. And then Raiden will come in here for 4 or 5. Another non-attack action that blocks for 3. So I'm over by 1. I can play Courageous Steel hand here to send him to 1. And I'm debating whether or not that is the correct decision. And I decide that I want to put him to 1. Because he doesn't know whether or not I'm playing Shunt. Although it's very unlikely that I play Shunt as Bolton. You never know. So we're both at 1 here. So we're both going to have to block here. However, I do have a little bit of a ace up my sleeve in that my attacks that attack for 3 or 4. And if I catch him with a hand that doesn't really block well in that it has attack actions, and he's used up all his armor, we're both at 1, he can't use his skull cap, that's actually going to demand a 2-card block. So my opponent actually doesn't have much of a turn there. He just pistols me twice, takes 2 of my cards. And I come in with Express Lightning 3 or 4 here. This is actually kind of hard to block if he doesn't have something like a Pour in the Mold or a Spark of Genius or something like that. He really needs a non-attack action that blocks for 3, and the amount that he has in his deck is pretty low. And we also see that he's at 7 cards right now in deck, which means that I know that the Plasma Purifier is very likely to be in this hand. If not, it's coming up next turn. So the fact that my opponent is taking a little bit of time to decide basically tells me that he has non-attack actions in his hand. And here I have to decide whether or not to use my Snapdragons or pull a card from my soul. Basically, I'm checking for Celestial Cataclysm. And if I have Celestial and the chance to draw it, then I should use Snapdragons. If I've already used 3 copies of it, then I should just use my soul. I believe I probably use the Snapdragons here. Just because I think I have like 12 or 13 cards left, and I have 1 Celestial left in the deck. So there's a decent chance that I draw it. So right now I'm just thinking about what to do here. I know that I have a pretty good shot at winning this game because he double blocked this. So I know that my Raiden is going to get double blocked as well, and then I can attack into him with a 4-card hand. One of which might be Celestial Cataclysm. And we see that he has the Plasma Purifier from a long, long time ago has actually come back around to haunt him. A card that blocks for 0, and I get there with exact lethal there. And yeah, so that's the game there. So let's go to the wrap-up right now. Alright guys, welcome back. Let's get to the key takeaways for that game and for this episode. In that game, you saw a very, very intricate match between 2 mid-range decks. And the interaction between them at various stages of the game was quite interesting. At the beginning of the game, we saw Dash being very aggressive, using the Achilles Accelerator actually on turn 3, and then having a very, very strong high-octane turn to round things off. On my side, you saw me buying time with Lumina Ascension and playing off my Tunic counter, waiting for a Via the Vanguard and a way to close the game. In terms of the key takeaways, I wrote down 2 things here. And The first is that at all stages of the game, you should be able to answer, how does your deck win? When you're sideboarding, you should have a plan. You should know how your deck intends to win. So during the sideboarding, I knew that my deck would win by having consistent damage output with every couple turns using the Tunic to enable a Take Flight followed up with a Raiden. I would use Beacon of Victory at key moments to push in damage, to trigger on-hit effects, and to grab Lumina. And I would try to weave in at least one large Via the Vanguard turn to push damage. My opponent also came in to the game with a plan. He knew exactly what he wanted to do as dash. He wanted to play a little bit more aggressively with a couple items as backup to finish the game off. The progression of our strategies was actually something that was quite interesting. And we saw that as several key cards got used, I had to adjust. And as several key cards did not show up, I had to adjust. So the fact that I didn't see Via the Vanguard for quite a while, I didn't have a strong Plunder Run turn until later in the game, I had to basically buy time. And that is something that is quite risky to do if I was playing against a control dash. However, based on his deck composition and how aggressive he is, I had a good sense that he was a more boost style dash with a little bit of item backup. And that's what the first couple turns of the game really are. If you are playing against a deck that can be sideboarded in many different ways, the first couple turns of the game, you should be using that to feel out what your opponent is trying to do. Once you know what your opponent is trying to do, that makes it much easier for you to develop a counter strategy to that. All right. The second point here I wrote is keeping track of the board state and deck state is critical to adjusting the strategy mid-game. So as my opponent used important cards like High Octane and his equipment, I knew that I would be able to... it is less likely that he can come in with a big turn, even if I just use it the whole turn to set up. Because a 5-card hand without accelerators, without a tech core out, without a High Octane, is not so scary for me. So I can adjust and I can say, okay, I can take things a little bit slower. However, if he still had a couple of those key cards that I talked about, I would have to adjust my strategy and go a little bit faster. Or I would have to take a little bit more risks. So those are just a couple things to keep in mind. So yeah, we've come to the end of the episode. Thank you guys for watching. I hope that you guys are doing well. And make sure you guys come back here for episode number 4, where we talk about using math for a competitive advantage. See you guys.